Hey, welcome back to Diode Press. I'm Graham. So today's video, I'm going to show you a few ways to transfer your image onto a wood panel to start your woodblock print. So the links to the other videos in this series, as well as all the materials and supplies that I used, will be listed down in the description box and also at the end of this video. So to quickly discuss drawing an image for your woodcut, if you're new to printmaking, you'll want to start with something simple to carve. So whatever you draw is up to you, but for this print, I'm making these pistons and piping. It's kind of a simple drawing and it'll make it pretty easy to carve. You'll want to think about a few things before you get started. Obviously the size of the print, but also how many colors the print will be and how many blocks you want to use. I'd start off with a single color wood block for your first one. Also remember that whatever's on your block when you carve it is going to be flipped over when you print. So this is really obvious with things like letters and numbers, but you'll also want to keep it in mind if you're making a print of a recognizable building or a landscape, so that way the final print is oriented the same as the real thing. The detail that you can print is going to be largely affected by the wood or linoleum block you're using. If you're using cherry plywood or another hardwood, you'll be able to carve very fine lines and details and they'll hold up well over time, but it'll be a bit more work to carve. If you're using Sheena plywood like I am, you'll need to work a little bit larger with a little bit less detail. So keeping your tools sharp will also make it a lot easier to get, the finer lines and details when you're doing your carving. And so the same goes for linoleum. You can get the thick, puffy, foamy stuff or the harder gray linoleum, and each one will have its own qualities and characteristics that'll affect the carving and your final print. So I'd buy a few small pieces of different materials and try out different techniques and see which one really fits your style and which one you like working with. So there are a lot of ways to get your image onto your block. So traditional woodblock printmaking, there's techniques where you use a very thin sheet of paper with your image printed on it or drawn on, and you apply that onto your block. But I'm just going to focus on the methods that I prefer and that I use often. So the easiest way to go is just to draw your image directly onto your block. Just make sure if you have text or numbers that you flip them on the block, so when you print the final image, they look correct. You can also use a carbon paper. If you have a drawing, you can use like a carbon paper like this, and this is like a wax-free transfer paper, and just use, typical transfer paper and just trace your image onto the block. So I like to do my drawings with traditional mediums on paper, and then I typically scan them in the computer and I'll make tweaks or do color separations and then print them out. So my preferred method for getting the image onto the block is the blender marker method. So I believe this method is similar to the acetone transfer method, and I've used this both on woodblock and linoleum block prints. So the first step is to print out your image from your regular printer and take it to a photocopy shop. And so if you're using this method, you want to make sure that your image is not flipped, because when you transfer it onto the block, it's going to flip it for you. So any text or anything should just be, normal reading when you look at the print. So there's two critical things here. You need to make sure that the photocopier that you're using is a toner copier. So most commercial, photocopy shops or, if there's one in your grocery store, they'll use toner. So this won't work if you just print it directly out of your home inkjet printer, unless you have a laser printer which uses a toner cartridge. And the second thing is you need to make sure that the darkness is cranked way up on the photocopy. So it's, a very strong black and white image. And that way there's lots of toner built up on the paper here. You can see on my copy, I marked corners of the image so I can cut down the paper copy to the exact size of my block. Now you can line up the copy, image side down against the wood or lino block. Since it's just a copy at this point, you can slide it around and get it perfectly positioned, and then I tape it down. And now I use a blender marker and draw over your image through the paper. This marker smells very strong, so you'll definitely need ventilation or do it outside ideally. But basically it's a marker with no color. What it does is it releases the black toner from the photocopy and transfers it onto your wood or lino block. I do a segment of the print and then use a block of wood or a spoon would work, and I burnish it down against the wood. Once I'm done, I check it and then redo a few light areas. That's where taping the paper down comes in handy, so you can move it around and then position it back in the same spot. And so the marker evaporates very quickly and then you're all done. And so that works really good, but the blender markers smell really bad. So if you have another alternative to using a blender marker or there's a different brand that doesn't smell so bad, let me know down below. I'd be curious to see if there's something better. And so the final method that I use is the inkjet transfer method. And so for this one, all you'll need is a piece of label paper. And so you just take off all the labels off the label paper. So all that's left is this waxy sheet of paper. And I've heard of people using parchment paper as well instead of the label paper, but I haven't tried it, so I don't know if it works. And again, with this method, you don't have to worry about flipping the image when you print it on here, because when you apply it to your wood block, that's going to be the flipped image already. And so just make sure when you print onto this paper, the ink goes on the wax side of the paper, not the smooth back side, but the waxed piece. And so really the ink is just almost floating on top of that waxed surface. So you go through the same steps as the blender marker method, but as you can see here, the ink is just sitting on top of the paper. so if you touch it or move it once it's against the wood, it'll definitely smudge. But the advantage is it's odorless and you can transfer any colors you want, and you can do it right at home. So just line it up on the block and press it down, and then burnish the paper against the block. The ink dries very quickly, just like the blender marker method, but just make sure you don't move it once you position it down. I haven't tried this on lino blocks, so I don't know if it'll work. I'd be afraid the ink on the paper might not dry out once it's transferred onto the linoleum, but I haven't tried it, so let me know if you have. And so all these methods work pretty well, and depending on the image and the complexity, I might use one method over another. And so the final thing before you start carving your block, you might want to put an ink wash over the image, so that way you can see the difference between where you're carving and where the wood that you don't want to carve is. Some people make the block completely black, and then draw on it with a white pen or pencil. But I like to use a mix of India ink and water, and do a few light coats over the block after my image is transferred onto it. You don't want to soak the wood or anything. The goal is just to stain the top layer of the wood. So when you get into carving it in the next video, it's really easy to see the areas of the block that you've carved, since it can be hard to tell if it's all just raw wood. This also makes the block a fairly accurate representation of the finished print, albeit reversed from the final image when you print it. Alright, and so that's all the different ways that I use to transfer an image onto a wood block. So like I said, you can draw right on it, use carbon paper, inkjet transfer, or the blender marker transfer. And again, just make sure whatever is on the actual wood block before you start carving is flipped from what you want it to be at the end, because once you print it, everything is going to be reversed. Alright, so in the next video I'll be carving and printing this image, so make sure to subscribe to the channel to keep up when I post them, and hit the thumbs up or share this video if you liked it. And then over here I'll have links to the other videos in the series, and I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.